Shabbat Shalom. Please be seated. Well, a person does not have to be a prophet or a genius or a scientist to see that that a lot of the prophecies in the Bible, whether you believe in the Bible or you don't, but if you do read, you find that so many of the things in the Bible have been proven to come to pass. And we look at what we have today, a time of turmoil. People angry all the time. And they, even if you drive and you made a mistake, they're not going to say, hey, be careful or keep your eyes open. The very first thing they say is, I'll kill you. Because life has become so cheap. They're willing to take your life because you made a mistake. Sorry about that. Yes, we live in a very turmoil time, and so much hate between nations. But isn't it kind of interesting that the Quran was evolved from the Hebrew Bible? We have Torah and they have Quran. Quran speaks of the reading. And we have we have about 1.5 billion Muslims. We have 1.5 billion Catholics. We have about 1.5 billion Christians, but yeah. Protestants, yeah. All three of these evolved from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew Bible. And pretty much Catholics, you know what they've done. They evolved from the people we know as Italians. But they were called the Romans, and they're the ones who crucified Yeshua. So we find that the Muslims hate the Jews, and yet they will tell you that they believe that Yeshua is a prophet. And they regard him at almost at the level of Muhammad. But they hate the Jews. Well, who are those Jews? Who are they? Even the Quran, Muhammad's writings, said that the land of Israel is the promised land from God to Isaac, Jacob, and Abraham. In the Quran. But let's hate the Jews, but we love Jesus. The Catholics love Jesus. The Protestants love Jesus. They pray to Jesus. But they hate the Jews. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If you have a problem with my parents, you have a problem with me too. They're my parents. If you hate the Jews, you hate the parents of Yeshua. And where was Yeshua? He was born in Bethlehem, Israel. He was born by Hebrew or Jewish parents. He went to the temple when he was in the Jerusalem or the Judean area. Every Shabbat, he would go to the temple to sacrifice and to pray to his Father. And yet, you hate the Jews. The very ones that if you read in the Exodus, you know what God calls them? He calls them my firstborn son. So, what do you think? If I hate the son, how can I love his father? I don't think his father is going to like me hating his son. So it does not make any sense, because God told Pharaoh, let my son go so he can worship me. And Pharaoh refused to let Moshe go. He refused to let Israel, the son of God, to go and worship his father. And so what happened? God destroyed Pharaoh and his army, and he drowned them the same way that Pharaoh drowned the firstborn of Israel. Now, this is not the Torah portion that I'm teaching, but I'm just wondering, we have all these people who claim to be so smart, so intellectual. They go to colleges, universities, and they become senators and what have you, and yet they hate and they cut the very branch they are sitting on. That makes no sense to me, but it makes sense to some others. Well, this portion is called Va'etchanen. My son gives me permission to write on this tablet here. So I will. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to leave the Vav out. We're just going to go to Aleph and Taf and Chet and Nen and Nun. So we see that the vet here is the bridge. It is the glue that connects those words together. And we see that the very first thing in the Torah is, I kind of get giggle when people tell me, well, if Yeshua was so important, how come he doesn't show up in the Old Testament? Really? He's not there? What I've seen him is from the very fourth word of Genesis. He's right there. And he's going right through all of it, of the old, what he called the Old Testament. I don't call it Old Testament. I call it the Word of God. How can the Word of God be ever old? To say that the Old Testament is old, that means Yeshua or God is old. And yet it says that the same God was the same yesterday, today, and forever. So who is going to tell me that it is Old Testament? You know what testament is? It's not an English word, by the way. It's Latin, testamento. And what it means is old covenant is what they say. It's an old covenant. That means it's no longer valid. We have a new covenant. And the new covenant abolishes the old covenant. And yet, in Jeremiah, it says that it's not out. In Ezekiel, it says, as long as there is day and night, the Word of God is the same. Guess what I did last night? Well, I went outside to see. It's still dark. It's still night. And then this morning, there's a day. So that means that I see the day and I see the night. That means the Torah is the same. So So I showed you here. Vav is the connecting, the glue. And it connects these two words to the other. So Aleph Taf, it's not Alpha and Omega. There's no such word in the Bible. Okay? That is Greek. Alpha and Omega doesn't exist. We're writing by the Hebrew prophets. And they would never use a Greek or Latin words. They will say that what we're contemplating and calling that Alpha and Omega is what they're speaking about, Aleph and Taf. Yeshua was the Aleph. He was the original creator. And the Taf, he is the finisher. So let me ask you this question. And God rested on the seventh day. And hallow, he made it holy. So my question is, did he really accomplish his work? Yes or no? See, you're not sure, are you? Well, let me put it this way. If we really believe that he has fulfilled his portion of creation, that means we are the finished product. If we're the finished product, what are we doing here? That means we have not got the new bodies yet. We have not been translated from this kingdom to God's kingdom. No, we're not. He has not finished his job. We're still in the transit of being complete, of being finished as being the Shabbat. We are going to be the Sabbath that God can rest in us as we rest in him. So now let me explain to you. Okay, going back to these two words, which means chen, or God's deliverance, and this is God, and this is he delivered us. So this plea from Yeshua calling to his Father, and the plea from Moshe to God, he begged God, forgive them. And we find that Moshe begged God not to wipe them out, and he pleaded by saying, if you're going to wipe them out, wipe my name also. And we see a shadow. What is the shadow? What are the final words of Yeshua on the tree? Remember, the snake came on the tree. Yeshua had to come back on the tree. He was the forbidden word that Adam and Chaya ate from. And Yeshua had to place himself back on the tree that gives life. Now, what were the final words of Yeshua? Were they not the same, mimicking the words of Moshe? Moshe says, please forgive them. What did Yeshua say? Forgive them, for they know not. So we see those two mighty men of God. Moshe, the Messiah of Israel on earth, and the Messiah from heaven, and they both went to the Father and pled with him, don't destroy them. So the word chen is pleasing, to please. Chen represents mercy. So we see here that this person here from the Aleph and Taf is going to be the one who will be pleading his father not to destroy Israel. And again, I have to remind you, you are not Jews. If you walk in the walk that I teach you from Torah, you are not Christians. You're not Catholics. You're not pagans. You're not Gentiles anymore. You are Israel. You are the son of God here on earth. And you don't have to be born from the Jewish parents or to have Jewish blood in you. Remember that your parents cannot save you. This is a personal thing that you have to go through. Salvation can come only between you and God. Now, you may say, well, I have a talit, and I have fringes, the tzitzit, and I kiss the mezuzah. This is all good. These are all just articles that people can see. What Yeshua is looking for is the heart. He knows before you do. He knows before your thought even comes. He knows what you're going to say. Now, you can show off to people and you walk around with your Bible, like some friends I have, they walk with the Bible all the time. Well, you can walk on the Bible, you can stamp on it, you can jump on it, you can sit on it. But God is not impressed with those things. You know what he's looking at? He's looking at your life. Now remember, the Torah says not the hearers are justified. Who is the justified then? The doers. It doesn't matter what your pastor or rabbi tells you. I'm telling you what the word says. You are not justified by listening to stories and to the stories of the rabbis and the stories of the preachers. You are going to be justified by the doing of what? God's commandment. Now, you know there's wars around the world. People are being stabbed in New York, being killed because they're Hebrew. People are hated. People are shot. Universities are closing down because they hate the Jews, anti-Semites. All they're doing right now is they're hating the parents of Yeshua. Whenever you become an anti-Semite, you hate the parents of Yeshua because they are the ones who gave life to him. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 12. How can I bear unaided the trouble of you and the burden and the bickering? So Moshe came towards the end of his life. He was 120 years old. He spent 40 years in the wilderness, taking the people of Israel, God's chosen people, to the promised land. And he's saying, I am tired. I'm 120 years old. I got scars on my back of all your bickering, and all the time you threatened to kill me, to stone me. I'm giving up. I just can't do it anymore. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do good. Devote yourself to justice. Aid the wronged. Uphold the rights of the orphans. Defend the cause of the widows. This portion is called Dvarim, the book of Dvarim, which is in the Latin Deuteronomy, but the Hebrew Dvarim speaks of words, things of substance, speech. Dvarim may be broken down as speeches. Each starts and concludes with a warning signs to guide us, like the one found in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 1. Listen to the laws, listen to the rules that I am instructing you to do. The same is repeated in the opening and closing of the next lesson, Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 40. Speech number 1. It can be found in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 1 all the way to 40. Speech number 2 is Deuteronomy chapter 5, 1 to 27. The next one is Deuteronomy 6 and 7. In today's portion, we learn the power of prayer. Before I go any further, I want to compliment and applaud Ryan and Chad for holding up the banner of Torah in their community. I am so proud of these two brothers. I'm elated. If I didn't do too much in this life, at least I was able to plant the seed on those two brothers who have such hunger and zeal for God. So proud of them. So in today's portion, we are studying about the power of prayer. Each time Moshe prayed for others, he was granted his wish. But when it comes to his prayer for himself, he was denied because he was the foreshadow of Yeshua. Right? He was the foreshadow of Yeshua. What do we find the connection here between the two? Well, Moshe just said, God, of all that I have done for your kingdom, at least allow me to see the people that I brought to here. Let me walk with them just for one day, just to let me walk into the promised land. And God denied him. Now, what is the foreshadow of Yeshua? He said, remove this cup from me. But nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. Imagine the Son of God who gave himself freely to mankind. He came down as a slave. He took his royal overcoat in heaven as the Son of the living God, the right hand of the Father. He took it off. He found some old burlap sacks and he put it upon himself, and he put ashes, metaphorically I speak, it's not in the Bible. He put ashes on his head and he said, I'm going to come down to my people and I'm going to let them abuse me, call me names, pull my beard, pull my hair, and then at the end I'm going to be nailed on a tree. He could have said no, but he offered himself a living sacrifice because he was the Lamb of God. So therefore, we find such similarities between Yeshua and Moshe, between Yeshua and Joseph. So many similarities. Both of these men, sons of God, were denied to enter the promised land. Luke 22:42. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Doesn't that remind you of somebody else? How about Isaac and his father Abraham? Not only did he not stand up to his father, Joseph was over 30 years old. He could have manhandled his father. But no, he says, Abba, please tie my legs and my arms so that I will, by any chance, I will not raise my hand on you to defend myself and thus to hurt you. Welcome, welcome. Shabbat Shalom. Now, what happens here in this visual that we see? He told his father to tie his arms and his legs. You know what they do to sacrifice of sheep and goats and cows? They bind them so they will not be moving around and hurt the Levites as they cut them. And Isaac is telling his father, bind me. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 37. In the last parasha, we find that Moshe is blaming Israel for God's anger against him and not permitting him to enter the promised land. That's the first time that Moshe is blaming Israel. Moshe complained, and he says, God, you allowed Joseph's bones to enter the land, yet to deny me to enter the land that I've been working for. And God replied. Joseph confessed to his land when his mistress said in Genesis 39:14, see, they have brought us a Hebrew man. And Joseph did not deny it. On the contrary, he said in Genesis 40 and verse 15, I was abducted from the land of the Hebrews. Therefore he shall be buried in his land. You, on the other side, did not admit to your land when the daughters of Yitro said in Exodus chapter 2, verse 19, an Egyptian man rescued us from the shepherds. And you heard this, and you were silent. Therefore, you shall not cross the Jordan. So when you pronounce it, it's Yarden, not Yardin. Okay, Yarden means the descending one. The Yarden speaks of Yeshua descending from heaven to earth. That's what water does. Water likes to go to its level. So the water from up in the mountains, mainly the white mountain, as it says, Lebanon, which is white, or Lavan. And the water comes from the snow of Hermon and descends down to the Dead Sea. Well, you see the image there? Yeshua is the white, he's the righteous one. He's the righteous one. And he's descending down to the Dead Sea. You know what Dead Sea is? That means there's no life in it. And therefore, that which was white and beautiful is now descended on the tree, and he gave his life like the Dead Sea. There's no living organism. Maybe the answer can be found in the speech Moshe gave them in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 1. When Moshe explains why it took them 40 years to arrive to the promised land, because of the spies. So do you know why? Why were the spies responsible for Moshe? But right before that, he mentions Yitro. Yitro means an addition, to add on. And the need for judges all the way back to the story of Yitro in Exodus. Moshe was sitting from morning till evening judging the people, and Yetro suggested that Moshe select judges to judge the people, and only the hard cases can be sent to him to judge. Now, I don't know about what church you went to, but I've been to many, many churches in this country. I went to teach Torah. And one thing across the board that I found is the church teaches, don't judge. Don't judge so you are not judged. Well, who are you going to listen to? The very first thing that God told Moshe is to find judges. And to do what? To judge the people. So are you going to listen to the pastor, or are you going to listen to God? This must be very important for us to see why Moshe is telling us the story in detail. The only way to understand the sin of the spies seems to connect to the story of Moshe's judging people in Exodus. If you read the story in Deuteronomy chapter 1, you will find many parallels of the story of the spies. Remember, there's really 3 books that teach us: Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Deuteronomy is not a book about teaching, but it's about remembrance, zechor. It goes right back to everything that God has given to them. It's like a sum total of their life. Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 8. See, sometimes in the Bible it says see, it speaks of understanding. You think it's just to see, but the word see, re'eh, means about comprehension, about understand what I'm saying. See, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he would give it to your fathers, Abraham, Itzhak, and Yaakov, and to their descendants after them. So who are those Muslims? Who are those Christians? Who are those Catholics who will come and say, well, it belongs to somebody else. It doesn't belong to the Hebrews. Listen, most of you have a house. Most of you are paying money for that house. And after you pay for the house, at some point you tell your wife, you know, we're pretty much debt free. Let's take a cruise. Go to Bahamas. Enjoy ourselves. You go to the Bahamas for 2 weeks. You come back and you see somebody else living in the house. The lights are on. The water is running. And you knock on the door and say, excuse me, what are you doing in my house? Oh, it's not your house. It's our home. This happened to me in reality right here in Forney. I had a house and I had a sign on it, for sale by owner. I was gone for a month in Arizona. And when I come back, I see 2 people with 2 big bulldogs living in my house. I knock on the door and I said, excuse me, what are you doing in my... It's not your house. It's my house. And we had a screen door. And he said, and you better get out of here before I open the door and let my dogs devour you. It took me a year and $12,000 to remove them. This is the law of Texas. You pay all the bills and somebody gets to move in and the law is on their side. And what are you all doing about it? Oh, nothing. No, we're not going to say nothing. And that's what happens. Bad things happen when good people do nothing. And if all of you are going to be like sheep to the slaughter, it can happen to you, God forbid. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Well, what is the word afraid and discouraged? We find that the spies came back and told us there's real giants in the promised land. Real giants. I'm talking about 10, 11, 12 foot high. So let me ask you, how does that compare? A 10 or 12 foot man, how does that compare to a 4 mile deep, the Red Sea? When God opened 4 miles of water on both sides, maybe 5 miles, I don't know, some of you may have done a research, but I know it's at least 4 miles deep. And they walked on dry land. How does that compare to a 10, 12 foot man? And if God could subdue a 4 mile water sea, could he not also subdue the 10 foot, 12 foot giants? But you know what it is? They judged by their speech. They condemned themselves. They condemned themselves by the words. They judged themselves to destruction. And this is why God destroyed them in the wilderness, because of their speech and because they believed it. And this is why only 2 men entered the land. So what do they come? They enter the land, and the first thing they see is giants. That's why it says, do not be afraid. And then they saw that there's more than one tribe. And there were the Ites, the Jebusites, the Hivite, the Canaanite. All these Ites, well, all of a sudden, they're going to stand there and fight against Israel. That's why he says, don't be discouraged, because I will fight for you. In both verses, it repeats God giving the land to Israel. So whether the Muslims believe in Allah and the Catholics believe in Jesus and the Christians believe in God, all I can see is here that it was God who gave the land to his people. Where's the United Nations? Do they read the Bible? I believe some of them may call themselves Christians. What about those countries, the European countries, who are siding with the Muslims to kill? What about our government saying about, I don't know, $150 billion to the enemies who want to destroy the parents of Yeshua? Do they go to church? Do they believe the Bible? I guess not. But did he give it to them, or did they have to fight for it? You see, if you understand what I'm saying now, you'll also understand about salvation. The churches teach us that the prayer of faith, you go to the pastor and he will anoint a little cross on your forehead and you're saved. Don't you hear this phrase all the time? Well, I've been saved since I was 2 months old. I was sprinkled and I'm saved. I'm sorry, but I'm not very educated. But it just makes no sense to me. That means that salvation is up to you. I'm saved. I said 3 times, Hail Mary, and I'm saved. But that's not what the Bible tells us. Listen to the famous person who is higher than Yeshua, maybe even higher than God. His name is Paul. And if you believe in this great Paul, he says, work out your salvation. It's about the working. Work out your salvation once in 10 years. No. Work out your salvation daily. That means today, if you're not walking with God, you may not be saved today. Because yesterday's works of righteousness will not benefit you today. You got to continue. It's the same thing as your food. You may have eaten yesterday's steak, a big one, with a big potato. But today you're hungry again. How does that make any sense? Work out your salvation daily with fear and trembling. Now, some of you have big muscles. I wish I had some. But some of you have big muscles. And those muscles are good if you maintain them. But those big muscles, if you don't work them out, a month, 3 months, 6 months, they'll turn to be like mine. Hello. See, I don't wave from here anymore. I'm waving from here. Like muscles, you got to maintain them. You got to give them food, and you got to exercise them. Muscles will not get maintained or got bigger by you thinking about it, doctor. You must exert those muscles. You must put them to work because we are physical. But then if the physical works that way, shouldn't our spirit also be exercised about reading Torah, about praying? The Muslims do it 5 times a day. The Hebrews do it 3 times a day. And I say it's never enough to pray. When you drive, instead of getting angry at like I do, say a prayer. Whatever the prayer is. Don't ask God to give you much money and make you strong and make you big. No. Just thank him for what he gives you. If you're able to breathe, because some people don't breathe, you know. The cemeteries are full of people who cannot breathe anymore. But those of us who can breathe, how about thanking God for that breath of life? You put the batteries in the car. Now listen, you got to understand what I'm saying here. God says, I will give you the land. But did he really give it to them? Or did they have to fight for it? If you understand that, you'll also understand salvation. God will give us salvation, but we have to work at it. Salvation is given to us, but we have to fight for it daily. Look, 10,000 young men and women gave their life in these 11 months. 10,000. When there are 6 million Jews as a nation and 10,000, do the math. How would that measure against the 350 million Americans here? 10,000 young people, the cream of the crop. The very best that Israel has to offer is 18 to 40. That's the best. They gave their life. And the same thing is that we are fighting against a world that is invisible. The evil one is fighting against us every single day. And the only way to fight him is with the AK-40. Am I saying this right? AK-40? Huh? I am familiar with the gun, but I'm not familiar with the AK. We're familiar with it was called by the Russian guy who actually invented it, Kalashnikov. So in Israel, we call it the Kalashnikov. But here I find that there's a AK, whatever that means. But you can have AK, you can have a bazooka or even a nuclear bomb, but you just can't kill spirit bodies. The only way that you can is through prayer and working out your salvation daily. Don't be nice when you come to synagogue for a few hours here, and then you turn to be a chameleon out there in the world, whether it's the workplace or at Walmart. No. Don't be a chameleon. Hold on to what God wants you to be. If you want to work towards righteousness, be righteous every single day. Be a living testimony. As the old saying is, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. We have to fight for it, as it says, that the kingdom of God is taken by what? Not by goodwill, huh? I know, but I'm saying it's not given by goodwill. It's given by force. That means you have to be a fighter. We say, well, I'm 80 years old. What does age have to do with anything? You can still fight, right? You can fight with prayer, supplication. And don't pray for yourself. No, Yeshua never prayed for himself. He says, forgive them, Father. And that's how we should pray here. Pray for other people who are in need. I'm so grateful to Carlos and his beautiful wife who literally make the sacrifice to go and pick up our doctor. Our doctor has been away for a long time. He was cornered by the evil one and eaten at his soul. And then Carlos and his wife made the sacrifice, and they pick him up and they bring him to us and take him back home. Let me tell you, if there is a sacrifice before you and you find a way to give it to somebody else, you just rob yourself of a blessing. If there is a sacrifice that you need to sacrifice for, that is what God is saying, I want to bless you. Now go and sacrifice like my son did. But how many of you really sacrifice? How many of you have helped other people when they were moving like they helped you? How many? How many want to come? How many want to come and do what Lily does every Shabbat? Okay. Now, you know, we never cleaned on Shabbat. We used to clean on the fourth day, right? On Wednesdays. Then we would come early and we all cleaned together because it wasn't Shabbat. So, but now, unfortunately, we don't come here on Wednesday. Many of you live far away and you just can't come on Wednesdays. So thank God that Chad and Ryan have gave into that. And look how blessed they are. Literally. Even though I miss both of them so much and I wish they would move here. But they are exactly where God called them to be. And yes, there are promises also. Not only did God promise to give us a land and other good things, but he also promised that there will be difficulties in our life. Yeah, sometimes he will take our loved ones. I miss my parents very much. Some of you have been abused by your fathers, and still when they're gone, you miss them because they're your father. Some of them lose our loved ones to our children. I lost 2 daughters. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss them. But I thank God for those that he spared him for my son and my daughter. And I bless Daniela as I bless my son today, because they've been serving God all their life. All their life. I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for my son. And I couldn't be here today if it wasn't for my daughter, who has to give her children to her brother so she can take care of her mom. It's a sacrifice. But it's a sacrifice that's worthwhile. Yes, God also promised that we're going to have difficulties in serving God during this journey. And salvation is obtained in the end when Yeshua returns to us. Now, I don't know if I'll get to see him while I'm alive. I mean, I really want to, but there's no guarantee for any of us. But wouldn't that be something if God has prolonged our life until Yeshua's return? And it's going to be very, very close. If I know anything about the prophecies in the Bible, I have to tell you, the greatest miracle of the 19th century, I've already told you this many times. Can anybody know what is the greatest miracle in Bible prophecy at the 19th century? The language, the Hebrew language, has been restored after 2000. But what else? Beautiful. 1948 was the greatest miracle, as my son says, the 20th century. The greatest miracle. Now you're talking about, the greatest miracle is when I see somebody, a dead person comes from the grave. That's what happened to a whole nation. They're all dead, just reading Ezekiel. The dead bones have become alive. A whole nation was dead. Not just one person. And he said, well, I haven't been there. Just fly to Israel and you'll see. Dead people rose from the dead. Deuteronomy chapter 1 and 9 till 13. Moshe is asking for some help for judges to judge the people. In verse 14, the people agreed and said, it is good idea. And then we compare Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 22. Now the people come to Moshe and ask Moshe if they can send people to spy the land. And then we find in verse 22 and 23, Moshe responds the same as they did. It is good in my eyes that you will go and spy the land. In each case, a request. In each case, a response. It's good that what you ask. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 15. First time, judges. There has never been judges in Israel until now. Moshe is using a Hebrew word, va'ekach. 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 Now, the English would translate, so I took the heads of your tribes. Wise people. And I put them over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s, and over 10s. What was their jobs? To judge. Your pastor may take you, well, you're not to judge. I think I believe this better than I believe the pastor. To judge. So why do the Christian teachers don't judge? Because maybe it's one of those that when you point to somebody, 3 fingers point right back to the pastor. He may be afraid that he might judge him now. But if he tells you, hey, like there was a very famous preacher on TV, Scott. in California. You remember him, Jim? He would fornicate with other women, and when he was, huh? Yeah, that's him. That's him. Yeah. Yeah, he's smoking cigars on TV. He says, I'm not teaching anymore until I see the telephone's ringing to give money. I'm not continuing. So he's they're just, what does he do? He's got a ranch with Arabian horses, and they were exercising them. And he just sitting there quietly, and the phones began to ring, and he went back to the audacity. I would never do this to y'all. You know why? I don't have Arabian horses, doctor. That's my problem. No, I would never do that. Never, ever, ever. So the question we have to ask is, does God judge? Does God judge? Yes. If we're made in his image, in his likeness, in his form, should we not also become like Yeshua? Should we not judge like Yeshua judged? Did he not rebuke the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 17. Here Moshe is imploring the judges to treat the small people. What do you mean small? Midgets? No, it talks about the common people, the blue-collar people. The same as the big people. That's what he uses. Well, the big people, of course, speaks of wealth. People who are wealthy, rulers, doctors, lawyers, realtors. Small people, big people, not about height. Do not be afraid in judging. Here, both small and great alike. Do not be afraid of anyone, for judgment belongs to God. Bring me any case that is too hard for you, and I will hear it. Today's judges are serving the devil. Today's judges, for the right amount of money, they will put criminals loose. And if, God forbid, you use the word homosexuals, lesbians, they're going to lock you up and throw the key. The judge will do that. Parents have no rights over their children. If the teachers decide, well, this boy looks like a girl, he needs to get surgery, and the parents have no rights, what do we do about it? Oh, well, the government. I'd rather give my life to protect God's laws than to live in this filth. Who wants to live in this filth? Chapter 1, 9 and 12. At that time I said to you, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. It seems that with all the wars, trials, and death in the wilderness, they have multiplied in the desert. But how can I bear your problems, add your burdens, and your disputes all by myself? Now, in the story of the spies, chapter 1 and verse 23, the same language speaks of the second time of the spies. Ve'ekach. This seemed like a good idea to me. So I took 12 scouts, one from each of the tribes, in chapter 1 and verse 28. The report was similar. The people, what do they say? The people are big, speaking of giants, and speaking of the small people, who were they? Themselves. So they spoke of the big people, the giants, and the small people, the common people from Israel. Now, I know it may not make a big deal to you, when you hear it for the first time, maybe, or the second time. But if you spoke the Hebrew and you read the Hebrew and you studied the customs and the parables of the Hebrew language, you will see how much it makes sense. Much, much more sense than if you read in Spanish or French or Chinese or English. Only Hebrew, the heavenly language, opens up revelation like you would not believe it. Chapter 1 and verse Moshe as a father has put down his child Israel, or his son Israel, and he tells them he can no longer carry them. That, listen to this, when a father, and I saw this happen, we take long walks, and the son is probably 4 or 5 years old, and he gets tired, he can barely walk, maybe even dragging himself, so the father will pick him up and put him on his shoulders. See, mothers carry the child on the side. Those hips are designed for the child to be comfortable. The father don't have those hips, so he puts him on the shoulder. Which one is higher elevated, the hips or the shoulders? Funny guy. Now listen, when the Levites carried the ark, it was not carried on the hips. It was carried on their shoulders. So if the commandments, the oracles of God are traveled at the highest point, there's nothing higher than the shoulder except the Holy of Holies. And you cannot put those staffs on your head. So I would say that the hips would be the closest thing to the holy place. Holy of Holies is right here. So you're going right to the source. And Israel, Moshe is telling Israel, listen, I carried you for 40 years. You're getting too heavy on me, and I have to let you down. He tells them he can no longer carry them. He left a vacuum, a doubt, a fear. If Moshe the father cannot carry us, how can we trust God to carry us? Who will protect and carry us again when the giants show up with their fortified cities and walls? We are better off going back to Egypt. Yes, life was hard, but we had cucumbers, we had garlic, we had onions. See, that matters to have garlic and onions. Yes, even though life was hard, but we had the onions and we had the cucumbers. Moshe is tempting to strengthen them by bringing to memory of their experiences. But in their minds, all they remember was his words. He can no longer carry them. So how would they know if God can carry them? All their experiences was that God wanted to annihilate them. Remember that? God said, I want to destroy them. And the only thing that kept us alive is Moshe. Now he says, I cannot carry you no more. That means we're doomed. We'd rather go back to Egypt. If it happened once, God can do it again. Chapter 1, verse 29. Then I say to you, do not be afraid. The Lord your God, who is going before you, he will fight for you. So it's like you're telling, because women are viewed as the pretty side of man. And so women are a little bit more sensitive. If you tell a woman, you are so ugly, and then you say, no, what I meant was you're not as pretty as the movie stars. That's not going to correct it, right, doctor? I mean, you're done. You're cooked. You might as well get a noose and hang yourself, because it doesn't matter what. You can buy her roses, you can buy her cakes and chocolate. No. You have said the forbidden word. You are finished. And that's what Israel has done. All they remember now is God was going to kill us, and Moshe saved us, and now he says, I'm done. You're on your own. That's it. God said, we're ugly, we're done. So you really, on one side, you have to take this for face value, that legitimate answer. But you know the problem was? The problem was they trusted Moshe and not God. And this is why, what did I tell you time and time again? I don't want you to trust me. I don't trust myself. I have to trust him every single day. And that's what I'm asking of you. Don't trust me. Well, the rabbi said, no, I want you to always say, the rabbi showed me the answer. He taught us. He showed me. But to think that you're going to use me as your righteousness? No. I'm like anybody else. I'm a human being. And with that note, I will say Shabbat Shalom.